What is going on out there in gunfighter land? I'll tell you, here in my world, there has been some trials and tribulations as of late, but God provides. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. God is at the center of everything that I do. This podcast is no different. Today we're going to be talking about the 327 Federal and the 32 H&R Magnum. Hidden gems or pointless de-evolution of revolver cartridges. Anyway, that's what we're going to discuss today. I am humbled that you guys listen. I truly am. That you guys come here for information, for advice, for opinions. I am honored and humbled that you guys do that. I see it as a great blessing. I'm even more humbled by the people that step up and want to be an active part of the podcast and support it and become a patron. And I just want to say a sincere thank you to those people. And if you want to become one of those people, you can go to Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I'm going to plug in the bio and then we'll get into the main topic. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector, pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. All right, so let's talk about the 327 Federal. Why does it exist? Was it just created to separate you from your money because they knew a certain portion of the people would buy it, and that's pretty much why they made it? Does it really offer anything? I'd say yes, it does. It does offer something. It offers, and from what I understand, the whole reason that it was mostly made was to fit another round in most compact revolvers. Now, I would be surprised if the Smith & Wesson Jframe was not the most popular of all time compact carry revolver. I have one in my pocket right now, a 357 Magnum Scandium Jframe, the 360 PD. It's not my normal go-to carry gun, but it is one of my very favorite lightweight options for like super covert carry, for when I'm going running, when I'm working out, things like that. It is a great choice for that. It's in 357 Magnum, and that's a really popular carry revolver. But other ones in that same kind of guise would be something like the Ruger LCR, Charter Arms. Taurus makes some copies, I think, of the Smith & Wesson. Let's say they bear a striking resemblance to the Smith & Wesson Jframes. And that size is super compact revolver. And why do people still carry those? Well, I have one in my pocket right now. Why do I still carry it? They're good for a lot of things. One of the things I was practicing today in dry fire was CQB. In a CQB situation, a revolver has some advantages. With most semi-autos, if you press the muzzle up against something, you can press that slide and barrel back and take it out of battery, meaning it won't fire. You can see in a ground fight why that might be a detriment. However, a revolver doesn't have that problem. You could literally shove that revolver as hard as you want into whatever it is and pull the trigger and it'll go off just fine. Also, it will usually fire inside some kind of container. I was also practicing that today, firing it with stuff around the cylinder, especially in like super cold weather. If you know what's a fast draw, already having your hand on the gun and your pistol or your revolver oriented at the target without them even knowing. That's pretty fast. That gives you quite the advantage. And a revolver can be fired out of a pocket and it won't interfere with the operating system of the gun. Usually, I guess it's possible that some kind of fabric or something, depending on the pocket, could get in between the cylinder and the frame. I've never had that happen or seen that happen, but it's much more likely to be able to be fired repeatedly inside a jacket pocket, a coat pocket, something like that. With the weather getting colder, you can see why that would be an advantage. There's a lot of advantages to the revolver. So these are still popular. They're a good choice, I think. They're not my main go-to everyday carry, but it's a viable option. And they still are. And the 327 Federal was kind of designed in that same size, that Smith & Wesson Jframe. I'm going to stick with that because it's what I have, what I own, and what I'm most familiar with, and it's probably the most popular. I'd be surprised if it wasn't. In that Smith & Wesson Jframe, you can get another round. So you go from 5 rounds to 6 rounds. Now, I don't want to poo-poo this because I'm not a capacity snob. That is one of the last considerations. Shootability, first round quick hits, the ability to get quick second and third shots, how accurate, how reliable the gun is, all those things to me trump capacity. And I'm not for like capacity bans or anything like that. I think you ought to be able to carry as many as you want. If you want to carry 20 round mags for your pistol, rock on. I sometimes do. But it's not my primary thing because I don't think it comes into play most of the time in most gunfights, especially with good marksmen. That being said, some people are that way. Some people, when they're trying to decide, one of the very first things they go to and consider is what's the capacity. For somebody like that, this may be more important to them. It goes from 5 rounds to 6 rounds. which as a percentage is far more than, let's say, does it hold 15 rounds or does it hold 17 rounds? Some people make a choice just based on that, the 17 versus 15. There's a far higher bump up in capacity from 5 to 6 than from 15 to 17, right? At least as far as percentages go. When you only have a few shots, that one more shot, right? Some people might think that's crucially important. Also, kind of the goal of this, I'd argue that it didn't really meet that goal, but at least overall, maybe in certain loadings. But to give the same power as a 357 Magnum, which is known for being a very, very, perhaps the most effective, let's say commonly carried defensive round, to equal that power and give you one more shot. That sounds awesome. That sounds great. Sign me up. We'll get to the detriments a little bit later. Let's look at some numbers, and your numbers may vary. This is from a single source. So, by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established, so go verify that for yourself. But 100 grain jacketed hollow point at 1400 feet a second. That's cooking. But remember, that's 100 grain versus 125 or 130 grain or 135 grain, which are pretty common. There's a vast swath of grain weights for the 357 Magnum. But a real common defensive one is the 125s, 135s. This is 100 grain, and it's at 1400. They also have 115 grain listing at 1300. I also see a listing for 115 grain at 1500 and 100 grain at 1655. Those are some pretty impressive numbers. The source I'm looking at quotes that for a 3 1/16 inch and a 5.5 inch barrel, which is kind of misleading because this was designed, I think, primarily for small, compact revolvers. I don't know what kind of velocities you're going to get out of an 1 7/8, which I believe is a standard on Jframes, or even a 2 inch, very small revolver. I don't know how much that velocity is going to drop. But those are pretty impressive numbers, right? Give credit where credit is due. 100 grain or 115 grain, which is a real common 9mm loading, right? And that's going at 1300 feet a second. Those are decent numbers. I'm not going to lie. Those are decent numbers. Now, let us consider some of the drawbacks to this. Well, when's the last time you remember seeing 327 Federal Magnum on the shelf at the store? Okay, maybe you have seen it recently. But it's far, I don't think anybody would argue that it's not far less common than 357 Magnum or 38 Special. Right, so you're giving up all that commonality of being able to get ammo and finding ammo when times are tough or things like that. Another one for me is on paper, maybe you could get some loads that equal the 357 Magnum in power on paper. But it's not a street-proven round, and that's the big hang-up for me, right? It's not a street-proven round. There's a difference between numbers on a page and people in the dirt, to put it bluntly. The 357 Magnum and the 38 Special have a long track record. 357 Magnum, if I remember correctly, has been around since the 30s. The 327 has been around since 2007, and kind of a flash in the pan, right? It still exists. People still chamber stuff for it, but kind of a flash in the pan. I don't think it has a street-proven track record. Certainly not to the extent of the 357 Magnum. Again, 357 Magnum with that 135 grain hollow point, depending on the loading, is known for being a good handgun stopping round. And at least in the world of handguns, where handguns aren't great stoppers in the first place. 357 Magnum has that reputation, and I think deservedly so. So, to me, that's the big hang-up. Yeah, on paper, maybe it has decent power, but I don't like to trust my stuff to things that are academic, right? That's like reading book after book after book on how to throw the perfect punch and how to disable your opponent, right? Versus somebody that's never read a book but has spent a bunch of time hitting the bag at the gym. Which one do you want in a fight to back you up? You want the guy that's done it a bunch. Well, the 357 has done it a bunch. Another thing is, if you don't know, E equals MC squared. Who'd have thought you'd be getting a physics lesson from former Marine Corps grunt? It's okay, you can trust me. I went to the School of Infantry. But E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times velocity squared. That squared is what I want to focus on. If you look at that, if you up the velocity, you get, at least on paper, quite a bit more power, energy foot-pounds at least, because it's velocity squared. There is a big argument as to whether that extra velocity and those extra foot-pounds make that much of a difference or not. They certainly look impressive on paper. A lot of ammunition companies do that, right? That's why, a big reason why a lot of people think that the 300 Win Mag is better for hunting large game than the 30-06 or the 308. Whether it actually is or not, that's up to you to decide, but a lot of people think that because of that number. They basically take a very similar or the same projectile in a lot of cases and bump it up faster. Not only does the velocity go up, but the energy goes up squared, so quite a bit more. Well, that's kind of how the 327 achieves that power level. And because the velocity is bumped up and the mass is lower, it should just, the inverse of that, how that physics works, it should give you less recoil if it had the same numbers on a page as 357 Magnum. So the people that tout this round as being so awesome, saying you could shoot something as powerful as the 357 Magnum with less recoil. Well, yeah, maybe. My issue with that is if I want less recoil, then I bump it back down to the 38 Special, or the 38 Special plus P, right? That's one of the great things about the 357 Magnum. Any revolver chambered in it that I'm aware of can fire 38 Special plus P and 38 Special. So if I want less recoil, I'll bump it down to the 38 Special plus P. If I want to bump it down even less, I will bump it down to the 38 Special. All three of those are far more common than the 327 Federal. And if I bump back down to 38 Special, I still get a very street-proven round. People look at that round as underpowered, but you got to remember that the police officers in this country carried 38 Special for a long, long time. I would argue that a 148 grain or 158 grain semi-wad cutter or wad cutter round, they have a proven track record. Are they the best? No. But at least they have a reputation, right? They have the stats that they work. Again, the 327, not so much. But I'd rather take a loading that has a good street proven reputation than a loading that looks better on paper that's unproven. That's just me. You may feel completely the opposite, and that's fine. If you wanted even less recoil and a gun chambered for the 327, or a gun chambered in this next round, because it came out first, the 32 H&R. I didn't even know this, but the 32 H&R was, I guess, introduced the year I was born. So you can go look that up and figure out what year I was born if you care that much. But it's quite a bit older than the 327 Federal. It's funny when I think of something like the 327 Federal as being like pretty much a brand new cartridge, and it's been around since 2007. But anyway, this has been around quite a bit longer. So this is basically similar in dimensions, just a little bit shorter. So in a revolver that'll shoot it, you could shoot, in a revolver that will shoot 327 Federal, you could shoot 32 H&R Magnum. These loadings, I'm looking at a 77 grain at 988, a 100 grain at 1200, a 90 grain at 1227, an 85 grain at 1263. It's a little bit less powerful. It's still some pretty impressive numbers. And I assume when they came out with this, they were trying to do the same thing, right? They were, because remember, the first gun I ever saw this in was a Smith & Wesson Jframe. This was quite a while ago. You know, it was designed, I think, and marketed as you get a increase in firepower over your normal revolver. And those aren't bad numbers. Again, those aren't bad. You get into the same problem with the 327, though. If you want even less recoil, the 327 Federal will also shoot the 32 Smith & Wesson. Now, I am not, nor is anybody listening to this alive, walking around on this earth still breathing continuously, as old as this cartridge. 1878 Smith & Wesson. For their pocket revolvers. Originally designed, as you might surmise from the year, as a black powder cartridge. You can shoot this cartridge in there too. You are looking at 85 grains at 705 or 98 grains at 705. Those are not impressive numbers. That would be a very mild round. Why might you want to shoot this? Well, for less recoil, for practice, if you're just practicing your draw at, 5 yards, something like that. You wanted a new shooter to shoot it. Jframes have quite a bit of recoil for their caliber, though that's so mild I think even that would be fairly manageable for most people. So it'll shoot all three of those cartridges. Some people will even say that it can shoot the 32, or as I was, the 32 Auto. Because the 32 Auto came out at a time when rimless cartridges weren't the norm. It's a semi-rimmed cartridge, so it should be able to drop in and stop. I've seen conflicting reports on whether you should or shouldn't do this. I don't know. I've never had a 327 Federal Magnum, or I don't know that I've ever had any 32 revolvers. I have had 32 semi-autos, one that I really liked. But I have never done this. I'm not telling you it's okay to do this or not okay to do this. I'm saying do your own research on that. But it may, very well may, shoot the 32 Auto, which is far more common. Even so, I'd say that none of those cartridges are as common as 357 Magnum 38 Special. But you do have the option to shoot all those different calibers, which is pretty cool. There are even some lever guns chambered in the 327 Federal. That's pretty cool. But on that one, I really got to ask myself why. Unless you just want something different for the sake of being different, which that's fine too. But why wouldn't you have that same lever gun in 357 Magnum? You're not really saving any space. It's not like you have that precious few millimeters like you do in a revolver cylinder. Maybe less recoil, but again, shoot. If you're just shooting 38 specials out of it, you are good there with the recoil. And I haven't priced it, but I got to imagine that 38 special is going to be cheaper than a 32 Smith & Wesson. So they make some lever guns chambered in it. They also make some bigger bore revolvers, like at least I have made them in the past. I don't know if they currently produce them, but like the Ruger Blackhawk, which is a awesome gun, and the 32 H&R mag. And in fact, if I was going to pick, somebody said you have to spend your money on a firearm chambered in 327 Federal, I'd probably get the Ruger Blackhawk with a long barrel. I don't know what they make it in, 5.5, 7.5, 10-inch barrel, something like that. Why? Because for me, I'm not going to carry this gun for defense. And if I'm going to have it for fun and shoot it cheaply, that means reloading, which means if I'm going to cast my own bullets, which I probably would for this, hard cast semi-wad cutters. And I think it would be with the right loading, not with like a factory self-defense loading, probably not with a lot of the rapid expanding hollow points. But with the right hard cast semi-wad cutter bullet, it'd probably be okay for deer size game, right? An average southeastern whitetail with a good broadside shot with that good bullet construction and that fairly high sectional density at those respectable velocities we looked at when I quoted them in the original one, because that's out of a full length barrel revolver. I'd feel okay hunting deer with that. I've taken a lot of deer with less powerful things. If I was casting my own bullets and just for having fun, it would certainly be a decent all around, because you could easily load down, take smaller game with it. So I think it'd be a pretty cool, decent gun for that. Anyway, that's my take on the 327 Federal, the 32 H&R. There have been a lot of these kind of cartridges in that same kind of guise. We even see something very similar very recently. I don't know if it's this year or last year, but with the 30 Super Carry. It's got to be super's right in the name. I think that is also going to be a flash in the pan. Yeah, could you go from 10 rounds to 11 rounds in a super subcompact gun? Yeah, you could, but you're also giving up all that proven reliability and availability and commonality that you get with a 9mm gun. There is that certain subset of the gun community. I'm not putting you down if this is you, like, more capacity, automatically better. I'm going to get that. And that's great if that's you. That's just not me. Are there some real advantages to the 327 Federal, the 32 H&R? I'd say yeah, there are, especially in a super subcompact revolver. Are those advantages, for me, worth giving up the proven track record and the availability of ammo of the 38 Special and 357 Magnum? No. To me, it's not worth the trade. But for you, the answer may be yes. I am not infallible, obviously. I serve a perfect and infallible God. And I am not that. That's why I worship my God. He is perfect. You don't have to agree with me all the time. If you disagree with me on this, that's fine. Which is a pretty good segue into the tactical verse of the day. But before we get there, the tactical tip of the day. And it's kind of going to be a reiteration of something that I harp on from time to time. But you really have to make sure that your practice loads and the loads you carry match same point of aim, point of impact. Again, if you're practicing like CQB drills where that's really not going to matter, a few inches away from the muzzle. But I have found this even more drastic sometimes in the super subcompact Jframe revolvers. And not specific to the Jframe, I don't think. It's just that's what I have. But different grain rates, different grain weights, different velocities can vary widely. I mean, scarily widely. Even at fairly close distances, what we would consider close distance. They can dramatically alter your point of aim, point of impact. So don't think if you're practicing with 130 grain, 38 special rounds and you're carrying 135 grain Spear Gold Dot plus P short barrel load, which is a great load. Got it in my pocket right now. But don't assume that that's going to hit the same point of aim, point of impact. It doesn't. I know that for me in my Jframes, that 135 grain Gold Dot short barrel load does shoot point of aim, point of impact. One of the big reasons is it's in my pocket, that and it has a good proven track record. But make sure with these revolvers you're really doing that and testing your carry load. People think revolvers don't malfunction. That's not true. Mine actually malfunctioned in dry fire today. It's been a while since I cleaned it, and when I was doing my dry fire drills, the trigger was a little gummy and it did not go all the way forward to be able to fire another shot. Revolvers certainly can malfunction and have issues. One of the issues I've seen them have is 38 Special 357 Magnum ammo has a rim on the back of it. Most people, that's pretty obvious. But those rims can vary quite a bit from manufacturer to manufacturer. And sometimes the revolvers have different tolerances. And some of that ammo will actually bind up or even lock up the cylinder on a revolver. So don't just assume that you can load ammo in your gun and it will fire. It very well may not. You got to check it, especially if it's going to be your carry load. Do not load up a certain load for your carry ammunition in your revolver and just assume it's a revolver, it's going to work. I'm just going to hit where I want to because I really, really want to. That's not how that works. You got to test it. Anyway, with that, the tactical verse of the day. The tactical verse of the day. Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep. For it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord, who sanctifies you. You shall keep my Sabbath. Therefore, it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. Work shall be done for 6 days, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations, as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. You'll find that in Exodus chapter 31. Remember that Sabbath day. Remember, it was given for our rest, for our enjoyment. The Sabbath was made for man. It's a gift from God. Enjoy it. Remember it. It's the only commandment where it says in the commandments, remember. And sadly, it seems to be one of the most common ones our society so easily forgets. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.